This is the Courage to Be podcast, and I'm your host, Tanya Vasallo. Today's episode is part of our menopause series, a topic that affects every woman either directly or indirectly. Before you check yourself out, I want you to pause and consider. This series is for any woman hitting 40 or older. And if you're not in that category, I encourage you to share this with a mom, a sister, a wife, a friend, a daughter, or a granddaughter. The more we spread this vital information, the better it will be for all of us as a collective. And before we dive in, I want to remind you that I'm on a mission to close the gender gap in podcasting so that more women's voices are heard. If this resonates with you, please rate, review, follow, and share the podcast. As a thank you, I'll send you my Manifesting Abundance course for free, a $997 value. Just follow the steps in the show notes after reviewing the podcast. We can only create this ripple effect together. Don't forget to check out the show notes and stick around until then for more gifts that I have just for you. Welcome back to the Courage to Be, where we have powerful conversations to transform your life and your business. And today it's about transforming your menopause and perimenopause life. You know, if you're listening to this, even if you're not a woman or identify as a woman, but you have women in your life that are in their 40s and their late 30s going into menopause, because all of us have to go through it. I'm just so excited to have Dr. Anna Garrett with us. Welcome, Dr. Anna.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yes, I've been wanting to sprinkle the podcast, even though it's the Courage to Be, with this series on menopause, because I think it's so important for us women and for the men that have women in their lives, which is the majority of them, whether it's a sister, a mom, a daughter, you know, whatever it is, the women that are in your life, that you can pass this information on to them. So let's start a little bit with your story, your journey. Tell us who you are, what you do, because I know you come from the side of pharma, and how it all came together to do the work that you're doing right now.
So, I am a pharmacist by training. I spent a lot of my career working in a hospital as a pharmacist. So, I actually had infectious disease as my specialty, which is sort of like not at all hormones, but I kind of moved around. I worked for industry for 6 months and hated it. And I was like, no, this isn't for me. And so I just kind of met some people. I moved to Asheville, and my job at the hospital here, which was my last real job, as I call it, included as part of it health coaching for the employees, because that was one of the benefits for our wellness program. So I did other things too, but I mean, I was a manager of different areas, but the health coaching is kind of what got me started. So the people that invariably showed up for health coaching were women who were 49 and about to turn 50, and they started telling me all these things that were going on. And this is before I ever went down the hormone rabbit hole. And I was like, that's interesting. And so I was 45 at the time. So I was listening to all these stories. And one day, this woman came in and she said, I just have had 2 psychiatric admissions, one on the good side and one on the bad side. So the good side is you admit yourself into the psych unit. The bad side is you try to commit suicide. And she had spent time in the psychiatric unit. They had given her all these medications for psychiatric illnesses. And she said to me, she said, I just knew that it was not a psychiatric issue. And so, we talked, and when she got discharged, she said, I thought it was hormonal. So she got hooked up with a clinic, and sure enough, all of her hormone levels were depleted, which had caused her to go into this psychiatric crisis. And I was like, so I was like, I had no idea. I better learn about this because it's coming. So I knew I wanted to start a business, and I had intended just to do mindset coaching with women in midlife because, with all the transitions that we go through, a good mindset coach can really make a big difference. But I thought, I have 6 years of pharmacy school behind me, and it's really dumb for me to give that up. So I have a friend who's a compounding pharmacist in Durham, North Carolina. And I went and spent the day with her, and she was doing these hormone consultations. And I was like, I could do that too. So I started learning. I trained with the American Academy of Anti-Aging Medicine. I started learning all I could. And so my trainer was actually my first client. I was my second client. My best friend was my third client. So I just started doing a little bit at a time and then started the business. And 6 years into it, fully left the hospital because I had taken a job in a clinic where I could just fill in to keep my income coming in while I built the business. So that one client is what really led me to take the deep dive into hormones. And as soon as I started my business, I started a private Facebook group, and I swear, the first, I don't know, 25 people that came into it, I bet 10 of them had like suicidal tendencies. And I was like, whoa, I don't know what I got myself into here. But I did learn, what that taught me was that there's a whole spectrum of what menopause or, perimenopause to menopause looks like. And you can have somebody who basically says, oh, my periods just stopped. I didn't have any problems, all the way to somebody who ends up in the psychiatric ward. So that's how I got started. I built the business. I did functional medicine training and finished that in 2022. And now I'm in the process of making shift more into talking about all the aspects of women's health and health span or lifespan, and really wanting to dig into all of the things that affect women's health along the way. So I'm not going to stop talking about hormones, but I'm going to be adding some things into the mix as well.
I love this. And I love listening to your journey and how you just followed the breadcrumbs, really,
Mhm.
of not knowing, but your curiosity. It just sounds like you do follow your curiosity and see where it leads you to, right?
Well, I
Um,
started out as an accountant, so if that tells you anything.
I love it, but that's great. I think that takes a lot of courage, of just paying attention and listening to what's moving you. What's your heart asking for? Like, oh, okay, I don't want to be at the job. Oh, wow, everyone's talking about, hormones. This person had, suicide thoughts, and
Mm.
that could be hormonal. Wait, let me go down this, like that is huge, Anna. Like just the fact that you were able to follow all these things and see where it keeps taking you. So let's talk about a little bit about that, like intuition and how that's served you following this path as to like what's next and how can I listen to the next steps.
Wow, that's a big question. So it's interesting that you say that because I've never considered myself to be very intuitive, although on the Myers-Briggs test, I have this very wild N score, so there must be something to that. But I tend to overthink things. But I guess if I slow down enough to really be able to listen to myself, and that's my challenge, is the slowing down part. I had to, in my 40s, say to myself, what do I want my work life to look like? And so obviously there was the coaching piece, which I had trained for, and there was the pharmacy school piece. But what I also wanted was freedom and flexibility to travel and to work anywhere. And so my challenge was like, okay, how am I going to put all this together? And, Zoom had recently come out at that point, because this was in probably 2010 when I was thinking about this, because I launched the business in 2011. And I was like, well, you know what? I can keep my foot in the door at the hospital and work part-time, and I can also start building the business. So I didn't completely just make the leap. I gave myself the opportunity to get my foot back in if I needed to. So I guess there's a piece about trusting myself in there too. But I guess it's just that I've never said no to anything because I love the work-wise. I love the idea of a good challenge. So before I got to Asheville, I met a physician, and he wanted me to start a new clinical service for their physician group. And I was like, why me? And he said, because I know you won't let it fail. And, that's one of the things about me is that I'm very, I'll stick to something, perhaps to my detriment down the road, but not in my work life. I've always known kind of when it was time to move. So with my work with Merck, the pharma company, I knew very quickly that that was not the job for me. And I just went. And I love new challenges. I'm not much on the implementation side of things. So usually I like to get a project going and then I move on to the next thing. So this business actually is the thing I've done the longest in my life.
That's huge though, Dr. Anna. I'm thinking, but it goes hand in hand because you gave the example of that patient of yours that
Mhm.
admitted herself and that intuitively she knew that something that it went beyond psychiatric, like, no, this is hormone. She knew there was something else. And then
Right.
she went and investigated in that part too. And I think that's such an important component, of just whatever it is that we're doing in life,
Mhm.
whether we're in menopause or perimenopause or postmenopause, puberty, whatever it is, just to really trust our intuitions and as to what it is that we want in life. In your case, like, okay, you were very clear, my business, this
Mhm.
is what I want to set up. I want freedom, I want flexibility. But from a body perspective, from a physical perspective
Absolutely.
too. Talk to us. Do you
Absolutely.
have any other cases of where I'm sure you do, of like either patients or, just people, women that you've talked to. It might have even happened for yourself, like where you're like, yeah, this was off, like it wasn't. I'll give you an example. For me, going into parent, because I'm not in menopause yet, but I was going down the rabbit hole of learning. I was like, okay, menopause should hit around 50, 51. That's the age my mom went into menopause. So I'm in my mid 40s. Let me start looking into what should I do? Like what should I eat? What kind of exercise? Yada, yada, yada. Not realizing I wasn't sleeping well. That was like my big first
Ah,
thing but for a year. And then I was like, okay, this could be. I'm not a big coffee drinker, but I was drinking a little bit of coffees here and there. I was like, well, zero coffees. I shouldn't drink any coffees. Then I was trying melatonin. Then I was trying CBD. Then I was trying, like every sleep hygiene that you can imagine. I was like, it went on for like a year and a half or two. And then I'm like, oh, wait a minute. Now, in hindsight, intuitively, I knew something was off. I just didn't know how to fix it. And I did not associate it to perimenopause. So, those are the kind of stories I'm looking for the listeners, because I know that whether it's anxiety, whether it's depression and suicidal thoughts with this, like whatever it is, don't discard it right away. Like I even talked to a friend this past, she just left me a message. She's like, I'm having massive migraines. She's 47. And I'm like, 4 days in a row, 4 migraines in 1 week. Like, this is crazy. Maybe it's something with my eye vision. She's like, or maybe it could be perimenopause,
yeah.
because she knows I'm doing this series. So share with us some of these crazy symptoms or things that, that our intuition is guiding us in the right direction, but maybe we're wanting to discard it with logic or maybe because we don't have enough information.
Okay, so I have three that I can think of right
Oh, I
offhand.
love that.
And one is very simple. So I used to teach, I think I called it Hormones 101 to the people at the hospital. And so I'd have this class and 30 people at a time would come and it was 6 weeks long. And the very first time I taught it, a woman came in and she was a nurse and of course nurses are all stressed out and everything, and so she was like, yeah, I'm just not sleeping. And I said, well, what are you doing before you go to bed? And maybe that just made me think of another one. She said, well, I'm on my iPad right up until I go to bed. And I said, well, how about for the next week until the next class you just stay off your iPad before you go to bed? And she came back the next week and she was like, oh, I'm sleeping great. I was like, yay, no iPads, no blue light. I had another one who also in this class who was a nurse and she was in graduate school. She was getting her doctorate or her master's or something. And she lived this like clean lifestyle, ate perfectly, very, very type A. except when she would drive home from work, she would basically into the grocery store parking lot, go into the store, buy a bag of chips, go home, sit down on her computer to study, and eat the entire bag of chips. She's like, I just don't understand why I do that. I was like, well, are you stressed? Yes. Well, where's the joy in your life? What brings you joy? Ballroom dancing. I said, well, how about if you start ballroom dancing again and you don't go into the grocery store and buy the chips? So she added back the ballroom dancing. I know these things just sound very, very simple, but what happens is we strip all of the joy out of our lives because we're so busy. And all of a sudden we're replacing, we're just doing mindless things that give us that crunch. We need something to chew on because we're so stressed, right? So it's either, what was the book there was a book I read. I think it was called Food is Easy, Life is Hard. And people have two profiles. They eat crunchy stuff or they eat soft, sweet, gooey stuff. The soft, sweet, gooey stuff is comfort. The crunchy stuff is a stress reliever, and it's generally not a healthy choice. So it's not a carrot stick, right? So anyway, we got her to add some ballroom dancing back in, and it was great. She graduated, and we did a lot of talking about why she didn't need to make straight A's. She already had a great job. All she was doing was getting the piece of paper. And so there was no real need for her to excel above everybody else because that was her last step. She wasn't going anywhere else in her career. So anyway, that was another one. And then I had somebody who was a sleep coach, or no, a parenting coach. And we worked on hormones, and she was eating low carb and working out and doing all the things. And she couldn't lose any weight. And she was just really, really frustrated. And I said, well, why don't we do your genetics and see what's there? And we did do her genetics. And as it turns out, she needed more than 150 grams of carbs per day to lose weight. And she had a dairy intolerance. So she wasn't lactose intolerant. So it wasn't showing up as a gut issue because she could tolerate the lactose, but dairy was very inflammatory for her. So we flipped around her nutrition, cut out the dairy, and all of a sudden she started losing weight. So there are so many places we can look. We can look at gut health. We can look at genetics. We can look at hormones. We can put it all together and really help somebody create their unique wellness blueprint to take forward and become the healthiest versions of themselves that they can be and live, long, healthy lives, getting on airplanes, playing with grandkids, doing whatever it is they want to do.
This is great. We're going to take a quick pause and we'll come back to this. I want to share an amazing opportunity. My signature event, Increase Your Income and Impact, is happening April 3rd through 5th, which is a Thursday through Saturday, in person in Santa Fe, New Mexico. You will walk away from these 3 days shifting your mindset from not enough money to manifesting on the spot. You'll also learn how to get over your fears of unworthiness so that you can have a greater impact on the world. Plus, you'll get to connect with some amazing people that you'll become friends with, create partnerships, and who knows, maybe even walk out with some business. These in-person events are life transforming, but don't take my word. Listen to what some of the past participants have to say.
Hi, I'm Ricky Quintana, and I decided to come back to experience I think it's my 4th retreat now with Tanya, because I've worked with her before and I knew that I would get amazing insights. And the most amazing thing I got out of this retreat this time was realizing that I was defining success for my business as a profit in terms of generally accepted accounting principles. And I was completely discounting the amazing success I've had in all the other aspects of my business. And I can't wait to work with Tanya on her new full-year program to make this happen in a very short period of time.
If you found this inspiring, if you'd like to join us in Santa Fe, New Mexico this April, I'm gifting you a 50% discounted ticket. All you have to do is leave us a rating and review on iTunes and post a couple of comments under your favorite episode on YouTube. Take a screenshot and email us at help.thecouragetobe@gmail.com and type in event discount to claim your discounted ticket. I look forward to being your mentor and guide to transform your life. So we were talking about these different examples that you were giving us, whether it was weight, whether it's sleep, finding the joy. What have you found, and the women that are in your group or the women that you've worked with, that are like the top, I don't know, 5 to 6, 5 to 10, whatever number comes to you, symptoms that we start seeing in perimenopause? And let's define perimenopause too for anyone, because I'm assuming that people maybe have listened to another episode and that they know what menopause is and perimenopause. And what I'm trying to do with the podcast and with the series is shine some light and understanding on what perimenopause is, what menopause is, and what postmenopause is, So
Okay.
yes, give us those definitions and then the top symptoms that you've seen women encounter.
So it's interesting that you asked that because I had an ad on Facebook. I don't have it now, but I had a perimenopause quiz on there. So I have results from 6,600 women, and I was able to categorize the top symptoms out of that. So,
That's great.
well, not only are women scratching themselves off, their doctors are scratching them off too. So that's the bigger problem. So perimenopause can begin anywhere from your mid to late 30s and lasts from 8 to 10 years. So if you think about it, that could get you about to age 50. So perimenopause is when your hormones begin to shift. And the first one that shifts is progesterone, because you stop ovulating regularly. And if you don't ovulate regularly, you don't make progesterone, which then allows estrogen to run the show all month. And we'll get into the symptoms in just a second, but they're all pretty much related to low progesterone. So menopause is just one day of your life, and it's the day that marks 12 months since your last period. How they came up with 12 months, I do not know, but that's the technical definition. And the average age of menopause is 51, but it's an average. So that means that half of the women are going to go through that one day before 51 and half are going to go after. And so like I was 59 before I was officially menopausal. So there's a whole range there. And then everything after that is postmenopause. So when somebody says, I'm in menopause, I know what they mean, you know what they mean, but the language is, it's somewhat important to at least understand what stage you're in. So technically, you're postmenopausal if you say you're in menopause. So the symptoms that typically show up first are insomnia, anxiety, weight gain, mood swings, and fatigue. And every single one of those is related to low progesterone. So what happens, and then I could add like crime scene periods in there on top of that. That's pretty near the top too. But all of those are related to the fact that you either have low progesterone or you have high estrogen. And they're kind of two sides of the same coin. So weight gain, for instance, is because estrogen tells tissue to grow. So if estrogen is running the show all month and it's telling your body to grow, that means you're going to gain weight. That means you're going to have breast tenderness. That means you're going to have heavy periods because it's telling your uterine lining to grow too. The insomnia and the anxiety and the mood swings, well, progesterone is your calming hormone. And so when you don't have any progesterone in your brain to calm you down, you start getting these new symptoms. And the problem is that those symptoms can be very vague. They can look like other things like thyroid issues, because, thyroid, anxiety, weight gain, trouble sleeping, they kind of all overlap, which is why it's hard to really isolate and pinpoint one thing. But if you were coming to me and you were 40 and you were saying that you had started having trouble sleeping and this was new for you, I would probably say that you had low progesterone. Probably don't need to test for that. But, and that's a whole other conversation about testing. So we may or may not get into that depending on what you have in mind. But those are the most common symptoms that women will experience. And they go to their doctor, and let's say you're 38 and you say you're having trouble sleeping or that you're having really heavy periods. Well, what are they going to do? They're going to put you on birth control. And birth control may make that worse. It'll make your periods better, but it won't solve the underlying hormone imbalance. And it may not help you sleep either. So, birth control is a band-aid. It can be very useful in short-term situations till the underlying root cause is found for what's going on, but it's terrible for your gut health and it causes nutrient deficiencies. So it's generally not a great answer, although many, many women are left on birth control till they're about 55. So
This is fascinating, Dr. Anna, because I feel like I gave birth later in life. I think I was 38, shy of a week of being 39, maybe. I have to do the numbers, but 38, 39. And then those crime scene periods started right after I gave birth. So I was like, oh, yeah, my periods got all messed. See, these are the stories we tell ourselves because of lack
Yep.
of information. It's just ignorance. So I told myself the story of those heavy periods are because I gave birth, and ever since I gave birth, it changed the presentation of the periods. And then I do remember even having a little bit of night sweats right afterwards. So I was like, okay, that must be hormonal too. But I was already in those years of perimenopause that I wish someone would have told me about, because I'm like, oh, wait a minute, that I was already 39. Like I'm giving birth, which your
Yeah.
hormones are already going crazy. And those years of already going into perimenopause, have you observed that or heard anything with other women that have given birth later in life and that it starts overlapping?
Yes. I have had probably 3 or 4 clients who had that very same situation. I had one that started to have like panic attacks and all kinds of stuff. She could no longer drive because she was having so much of an issue with panic. She couldn't keep her job. I mean, it was just a mess, with this baby. And then her husband got a brain tumor and died. I mean, it just was an unbelievable sort of progression of events. So we stayed in touch for quite a while. We're not anymore, but I have seen that happen. I've seen women go off birth control and have, nothing else happen. They're like in menopause. So there is such a huge spectrum of symptoms that women can have. So I say, well, you've seen one woman in perimenopause, you've seen one woman in perimenopause, because people's experiences can be so different. But then when you get to postmenopause, the whole picture of the symptoms flips around. And some of what you experienced over on the perimenopause side can go away, but you may get new things like joint aches and pains and vaginal dryness and hot flashes and night sweats, depression, brain fog. So that the picture, I call it the dry picture, because everything just basically dries out. Your eyes dry out, your hair dries out, your vagina dries out. It's all like just completely different than what you see over in perimenopause as a general rule.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. Just to note for those of us that haven't gotten there,
Yeah.
like, okay, it doesn't mean that these symptoms are going to be the same throughout that time. So, say you were to start like some type of hormone treatment, like what I want to rewind a little bit before even we go with this. Let's talk about doctors and the lack of knowledge with menopause, because a lot of them say, the friends that I've talked to, oh, go to the gynecologist, oh, go to your primary, oh, go to the function, and it's like, who should we really be listening to?
Me.
I like it. I love that determination.
So AARP, like 5 or 6 years ago, published an article that was called Why Your Doctor Can't Help You in Menopause, which should tell you something. So they then studied YN residency programs. So we think OBGYNs, oh, they're the hormone experts. Well, no, OBGYNs are in business mostly to help you have babies. And so only 20% of OBGYN residency programs offered any specific training in hormones. And of that training that was offered, most of it was elective. So we wonder why nobody can help because nobody has the training. And, I've worked in a doctor's office and I will be the last person to bash doctors because basically they are set up, and this is not including concierge practices, they're set up as glorified factory workers. So the insurance companies have established guidelines for how long a typical, average visit should be 7 minutes. So, how much conversation can there be about hormones in 7 minutes? It's much easier to write a prescription for birth control pills or antidepressants or an anti-anxiety medication and send you on your way. So, who should you go to? So, what I tell people, well, first of all, I'll tell people to skip the endocrinologist because they're going to do diabetes and thyroid. They're not going to want to deal with your hormones. I tell people to contact the compounding pharmacy in their town and ask who is prescribing bioidentical hormones or hormones at all. And they're going to know because they're going to be the ones making the compounded products or they're going to be filling the estrogen patches or whatever. So to me, they're a very reliable source of finding a physician who actually knows what they're doing. And they know who knows what they're doing and who doesn't. So, you and I could have an hours long conversation about this because when you find a doctor, there's two camps. There's the camp that says, oh, we should not be using compounded products because they're not FDA approved. You should only go see a North American Menopause Society person who's passed this test. So they're all kind of in one camp. Then there are the more alternative people who are very willing to use compounded products because it offers an alternative for women who can't tolerate what's available commercially. So let's talk about oral progesterone. Oral progesterone is made in peanut oil. Well, if you've got a peanut allergy, you can't use oral progesterone. You have to have one that's compounded. So on one side, we've got some people saying it's not safe to use compounded products with the caveat, oh, but unless you have a peanut allergy and then it's safe. And the argument makes no sense. And these are the same people who say, oh, you don't need to have your hormones tested. I agree with that in some cases, but like I had a client recently who's 63, she's been in menopause for years, she's been on hormones, but she started having bleeding like every 2 weeks on her hormones, and that's not normal. So that needs to get checked out to make sure that you don't have uterine cancer, and she did not. And her doctor wouldn't test her levels so that we could look at the balance and see what was off. And so finally, she just left that practice and went back to her old doctor who will do that kind of stuff. So, the Menopause Society has guidelines, but guidelines are guidelines. Guidelines are not rules. It doesn't mean that there can't be situations outside of a guideline where you need to use your common sense and do what's right for the patient. And if you don't have the education or the training where you feel comfortable doing that, then you need to send your patient somewhere else to get it. So now I'm going to get down off my soapbox.
But I love this. We need more people like yourself sharing these kind of things over and over and over again, because it's through repetition that we get to start saying, like, maybe they didn't hear it from you on this podcast episode, but they heard it from someone else on a previous one, or they read it somewhere and suddenly it clicks for them, so it's not a soapbox. I think it's important to understand this. Like, as you're saying it, I'm thinking I have a friend that immediately, she's now 51. She's still not in menopause. She hasn't gone over that crossover, but she started developing, I want to say, depression and anxiety in her early 40s. In her head, I'm seeing it from the outside, and I could be wrong. I'm not a doctor, I'm not a hormone expert, but she was telling me, like, oh, yes, I've had depression, and then the anxiety started in her later 40s. But remember this episode of, like, where I started to feel depressed? And I'm thinking to myself, now that I'm hearing you say all this of the age range, I'm like, well, that could have been, that doesn't mean that you're a depressive person, like that you have chronic depression. It might have been not treated correctly because they immediately put you on antidepressants, and they
Right.
haven't, an anti-anxiety, and you've been taking them now for 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years. But maybe it was a hormone deficiency of some sort, and that you haven't explored that avenue.
Well, and some women genetically are wired so that the estrogen receptors in their brain, because we have estrogen receptors all over our body, the estrogen receptors in their brain are exquisitely sensitive to lack of estrogen. So they are the ones who, when the estrogen levels fall, tend to be more likely to fall into these depressive episodes. There's a book called XX Brain by Lisa Mosconi, I think is her last
It
name.
is. I was going to
Yeah.
ask you if you'd read her. I haven't read that one, XX Brain. I'm writing it down. I read The Menopause Brain. Have you read
Okay,
that
I haven't
one?
read that one.
Oh, that is such a, it just came out this year, 2024.
Hmm.
Well, we're in 2025, but last year then. And it was just because she's also leading Alzheimer's and women at
Yes.
Cornell. So she's the first doctor to study women's brains during menopause, perimenopause, postmenopause, and to see the correlation that it has with Alzheimer's. So I think you'll love that book too. I'm gonna go look for the XX Brain too.
Well, there's just this evolving body of evidence about how important it is for women to maintain their estrogen levels throughout their lifespan, from a bone health, from a heart health, from a brain health aspect. Never mind about hot flashes. I mean, that's kind of the least of your problems once you get it to be like in your 70s and stuff. So, I love that all this research is coming out, but what I don't love is that a lot of doctors aren't keeping up with the research, and they are, in fact, back in 2002, when the Women's Health Initiative came out, and are still afraid of prescribing estrogen because they think it causes cancer, and it does not. It does not cause cancer.
Yeah, that was debunked, that whole women's health initiative that
Hmm.
was done in the early 2000s, which is when my mom, for example, she did have a patch, and the rumor was out that it was going to give you breast cancer or whatever, and she immediately took it off. So,
Right.
yeah, it's interesting to see how it's evolving, but thank you for shining some light. And if you're listening to this, please make sure to go to our follow-up episode, because Dr. Anna is going to be talking to us about hormones and our health span. We're going to go deeper into hormones and what you can do or what you can be looking out for. But before we wrap up this episode, Dr. Anna, where can people find you?
Well, the first place to find me is at my website, dranngarrett.com. I also have a free Facebook group. It's called Perimenopause. It's called Hormone Harmony Club, and in parentheses, perimenopause and menopause. And then I also have a paid membership group where people get access to guest speakers. I do a Q&A every month. So that is on my website. And then I do one-on-one work with my clients on hormones, gut health, genetics, food sensitivity testing, you name it, I probably do it. So, place to start is my website.
Thank you. And what about my favorite question? This is the only question that I do have prepared before the podcast, is what can our listeners do to live a life with more courage?
I would say, related to this topic that we're talking about, and I realize it doesn't have to be related to that, but I would say don't be afraid to advocate for yourself, because you know your body better than anybody and you're in charge of it 24/7. So by all means, if you feel like something is not going the way you want it when you're having a conversation with your doctor, or you don't want to do whatever it is they're recommending, say so, because there may be other alternatives. And in fact, I have 2 blog posts on my website about how to work with your doctor and how to get the care you want in menopause. So it lays out some like 10 steps to take. So part of it involves you thinking about what you want ahead of time and knowing what a few of the options are without getting a medical degree. And then how to talk to your doctor about those options and how to be honest with your doctor if you're not going to do what they say to do. Not everybody wants to give up their glass of wine at night. Okay, well,
Yeah.
that's your line in the sand. But you need to say that. And so I would say just don't be afraid to advocate for yourself.
Thank you for that reminder. We've had a couple episodes. Like I remember one with Gina Mayer Vincent. It was like episode 105, 106. I can't remember exactly, where she was advocating for her husband. We had another one with a dentist where she just put her foot on the sand, like no more root canals, and how she had like 7 root canals in like 1 year. It was like ridiculous. And how she became a coach for people to advocate with their dental too. But thank you so much, Anna, for being with us and
You're
sharing.
welcome. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining me in this episode of the Courage to Be podcast, part of our menopause series. If you found value in this conversation, I encourage you to explore other episodes in the series. We're diving deep into topics every woman over 40 should know about. And if this resonated with you, please rate, review, and share it with the women in your life. Together, we can create a powerful ripple effect of awareness and support.